meeting between Nigeria's President Buhari and the Governors Forum on the proposed 30,000 naira national minimum wage ended in a deadlock. Recall that the majority of the 36 state governors had maintained that they could only afford to pay 22,500 naira. They had also stated that the other options were for them to reduce their workforce, or the federal government would have to review the revenue sharing formula to make more money available to the states. Those at the meeting included Lagos State Governor Akinwumi Ambode, Kebbi State Governor Mr. Atiku Bagudu, led by the chairman of the NGF, and the governor of Zamfara State, Abdulaziz Yar. Arise business analyst Bode Ososami joins me now from London to discuss this. Bode, good afternoon. What should happen next if they say they cannot afford to make these payments?
Well, good afternoon, Idia. Understandably, there could be financial challenges with making these payments. We're talking of in some of the packages as much as 60% increase in the package. That could be quite a lot. But my view is, first we have to establish the principle. We are righting a wrong. This is not like you're building a bridge or looking for money to finance a project. We're talking about lives of people, families, livelihoods that have been cheated, and you're trying to correct something. So I think the perspective is first important so that you know how to reprioritize. The other thing is that we shouldn't be talking about retrenchment. That's not the issue here. But even before we can look for any supplementary funding, I think the government needs to establish through an independent review that there is no scope for rearranging priorities within many of these states, because you will find, and I've done some of these reviews before, it's difficult for someone to let go of the comfortable cushions and security votes and all these available funds that are there. Yeah. So somebody has to be able to look at this independently, maybe from the Ministry of Finance, with maybe consultants, and independently look at what is going on in each state and come up with, it could be an opportunity to reform how they spend and what they do. And I find it extremely difficult to see how a country, this is Nigeria, the largest economy in Africa. We cannot afford to pay a barely decent living wage, which is not even in the upper quartile, or even the upper 50%. If you look at the percentile of the wages we are paying at 30, the 30,000 we're even paying, we're not at the top. So my sense is there could be an opportunity here, and there are ways of also, reducing headcount. You can, of course, encourage people to disengage. There are incentives that you give that people leave willingly if you find that you have excesses, and you may actually not find excesses in some cases. Although I see that some of the states are not viable economically, and maybe they shouldn't have been states in the first place, but that's a more structural problem that will be more difficult to solve. So I think it's premature to come to the conclusion that there is no way out apart from retrenchment and massive allocations. And before any funding or any additional allocation is given, I think we should establish the principle that this has to be done. The law, the bill should be passed with the correct wage, and even the process for doing this on an annual basis based on inflation plus should be established so that there is fairness in subsequent years. Now, the other issue, of course, is this assessment, which I think is necessary before you can begin to think of whether to borrow money or to provide some supplementary allocations from contingencies or wherever the money is likely to come from. Because I'm sure, even you hear Lagos State saying they can't sustain it. Can you imagine Lagos State saying they can't sustain 30,000 minimum wage? Doesn't that sound ridiculous, to you? So definitely everyone is saying they can't. It's almost fashionable to keep all the money that you can get until somebody says this just can't continue to go on.
Well, Bode, you've made some very, very fine points there, observations and suggestions, and I'm citing that independent review that you mentioned as a very, very important fact that you mentioned. Now, how do you think that this is likely to develop? Do you think that they'll come to some sort of agreement, or is the minimum wage improvement dead on arrival?
Well, of course, it all depends on the president, and many analysts believe it will be suicidal politically to trifle with this minimum wage, particularly at this
like
toxic political time when everyone would be using it as a lever for promising one thing or the other. But the important thing is they have to pay for it. The money has to come from somewhere. That means there will be sacrifices to be made. If the government decides not to make this payment, I think the Labour are justified to keep asking for it, because in other economies, this is what is expected. And you know that we are doing a correction here, because the ideal thing is that annually something should have been done, but it wasn't done. So there should it just shouldn't be happening that we are saying we cannot afford it. It just means we must take money out of somewhere else and put it into this, if indeed the money can't be found. Just look at the windfalls we've enjoyed from good oil prices, for example. So I'm sure there are cushions that are there and contingencies available for the country to pay, except maybe they just don't care about these people who perhaps don't have the voice to challenge them adequately, which is why the NLC needs to keep up with the pressure.
Bode, thank you so much for joining me to discuss this. I couldn't agree with you more. I think the government just doesn't care and thinks they can get away with it. Arise business analyst there, Bode Ososami. You're watching the Global Business Report here on Arise News.